In 1888 Chicago, two quiet sisters offer supper and shelter to weary men seeking work near the stockyards. They run a proper house on Ashland Avenue, lace curtains, warm stew, and always a room available. But behind the coal bin, beneath the kitchen floor, lies a cellar no neighbor ever knew existed. Lime in the dirt, glass jars along the wall, and inside them, things no boarding house should keep. Why did so many vanish? And how did the sisters vanish even faster? If you would like me to continue creating stories so that this history, which is not taught in schools, is not forgotten, please subscribe to this channel. Write in the comments where you are watching from. The October morning hung heavy with coal smoke as Orlin Mayhew guided his delivery wagon down Ashland Avenue. At 16, he knew every cobblestone and hitching post along his route, but number 721 always made him pause. The house stood straight-backed and proper, its dark windows like hollow eyes watching the street. He hefted the coal sack onto his shoulder, boots crunching through frost-crisp leaves. Before he could knock, the door opened. Miss Eunice Whitmore stood in the frame, her morning dress pristine despite the early hour. Behind her, Miss Agatha's smaller figure hovered like a shadow. "Good morning, young Mr. Mayhew," Eunice said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of her teaching days. "You may leave it on the porch." Orlin nodded, lowering the sack carefully. The wooden boards creaked beneath his feet, and through the gaps an odd smell drifted up, sharp like vinegar, but with a metallic edge that reminded him of the blacksmith's shop. He tried not to wrinkle his nose. "Will that be all, ma'am?" he asked, straightening up. "Quite all," Eunice replied. Agatha merely nodded, her hands clasped tightly at her waist. 2 days later, Walter Lentz failed to appear at Wendell's Hat Emporium on Madison Street. His carefully wrapped packages, 2 ladies' hats in violet and grey felt, sat unclaimed on the counter, while George Wendell paced the floor, checking his pocket watch every quarter hour. By closing time, Wendell had worked himself into a proper state. "Most irregular," he muttered, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. "Mr. Lentz has never missed a pickup. Never." The next morning, Wendell marched straight to the Des Plaines Street Police Station. Officer Patrick Murphy took down the details in his logbook. Walter Lentz, age 26, Cincinnati native, staying at the Whitmore boarding house on Ashland. Last seen October 3rd. Murphy and his partner, Officer Davies, paid a call to 721 Ashland that afternoon. Miss Eunice received them in the front parlor, where a small coal fire burned in the grate. She sat ramrod straight in her chair, hands folded neatly in her lap. "Mr. Lentz departed quite suddenly yesterday morning," she explained, her voice smooth as church bells. "He mentioned business in Joliet, seemed rather urgent about it. Settled his account and left before breakfast." "Did he say when he'd return for his effects?" Murphy asked, pencil poised over his notepad. "He took his valise," Eunice replied. "Said he'd send for the rest later." The officers exchanged glances. With no signs of struggle and no body, there was little they could do. Murphy filed his report under abandoned lodging and considered the matter closed. But that evening, Deputy Sheriff Clark Moffat stood in Lentz's room, studying the untouched bed and neatly arranged tools of the hatter's trade. The air felt stale, undisturbed. On the small writing desk lay Lentz's invoice ledger, open to his last entry. October 3rd, 1888. Whitmore sisters, 2 felt hats, violet and grey, paid cash. Moffat copied the entry carefully, intending to file it with the county archives. In his own ledger he wrote, "Walter Lentz, missing person. No foul play suspected at this time." The gas lamps along Canal Street cast long shadows as Elias Heimer paced the platform of the Chicago Burlington and Quincy Station. His pocket watch showed 6:45 p.m. The Aurora-bound train would depart in 15 minutes, and Joseph Kellerman was nowhere in sight. Heimer adjusted his wool coat against the November chill, scanning the crowd for Kellerman's distinctive green felt cap. The young Swede had never been late before, not in 2 years at the stockyards. They needed him in Aurora tonight. The slaughterhouse inventory wouldn't wait. The stationmaster's bell rang out. All aboard, Aurora Express, departing Platform 3. Hold a moment, Heimer called out, but steam was already building beneath the locomotive's wheels. He watched helplessly as the train pulled away into the gathering dark, carrying only Kellerman's empty seat. The next morning, Heimer walked his usual route down Halsted Street, stopping to question the shopkeepers and labourers who knew Kellerman. At Murphy's Dry Goods, Mrs. Dennehy looked up from her washing, her raw hands dripping soap water. "The Swedish fellow?" "Yes, I saw him Tuesday last," she said, wringing out a sheet. "Said he'd taken a room at the Whitmore place on Ashland. Quiet sisters, those two, always wearing black like they're fresh from a funeral." Heimer's stomach tightened. He'd heard that name before, connected to something unsettling. By noon, he was sitting across from Deputy Sheriff Clark Moffat at the Cook County office, watching the lawman's weathered hands open a familiar ledger. "Whitmore sisters, you say?" Moffat's eyes narrowed. "That's the second disappearance reported from that address." They rode together to 721 Ashland, their horses' hooves echoing off the brick facades. Miss Eunice answered their knock, her sister Agatha hovering just behind her shoulder. Heimer noticed how Agatha's fingers gripped a worn leather satchel, knuckles white against the brown hide. "Mr. Kellerman?" Eunice's voice carried the precise tone of a schoolteacher. "Why, yes, he stayed briefly. But he left rather suddenly, quite taken with a Polish girl from 18th Street. Said he was going to win her heart." She smiled thinly. "Young men can be so impulsive, can't they?" As they spoke, Moffat's eyes drifted toward the cellar steps, visible through the kitchen door. A sharp, chemical smell, like vinegar mixed with metal, wafted up from below. He'd noticed that same scent during his last visit about the Lentz disappearance. "And his belongings?" Moffat asked. "Took everything but an old cap," Agatha spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. Her grip on the satchel tightened. 2 days later, the Swedish Lutheran Church placed a notice in the Chicago Times. "Missing, John Kellerson. Last seen November 14th, 1888. Swedish national, age 33. Employed at Union Stockyards, known to wear green felt cap. Any information? Contact Reverend Larson, Swedish Lutheran Church, Morgan Street." The following week, an envelope arrived at the sheriff's office. Inside was the newspaper clipping, carefully cut out, with 3 words scrawled in black ink across the bottom. "Check their coal." The snow fell in thick curtains across Chicago's near west side, turning Ashland Avenue into a canvas of white. Chimney smoke hung low, trapped by the heavy December air, as families huddled around their hearths, feeding precious coal into hungry stoves. At number 734, Mrs. Lavina Greer stood at her frost-covered window, watching her coal bin dwindle. Her young son Timothy, 12 and slight, stamped his feet by the door, already wrapped in 2 scarves. "Just run down to the Whitmores, dear," she said, pressing a small basket into his mittened hands. "Ask to borrow half a scuttle. Tell them we'll repay on Tuesday when the coal wagon comes." Timothy trudged through knee-deep snow, counting houses, until he reached 721. The windows were dark despite the early hour, frost creeping up the glass like skeletal fingers. As he rounded the side of the house toward the coal chute, a gust of wind carried a peculiar odor. Sharp and medicinal, like the time he'd spilled iodine in his father's workshop. The smell grew stronger near a gap in the foundation stones. Timothy crouched, the cold biting through his wool stockings. Another blast of wind pushed through the opening, carrying that wrong smell. Not coal dust or chimney smoke, but something that made his eyes water. He scrambled back to his mother without knocking, leaving small boot prints in the virgin snow. "Something's wrong there," he whispered, face pale beneath his winter flush. Something bad behind the house. That evening, as darkness settled early over the storm-muffled street, Dr. Caleb Roth sat at his desk 3 doors down, recording his daily observations by lamplight. His spectacles caught the flame's reflection as he dipped his pen. December 7th, 1888. Weather: heavy snow, wind NNE, temp near 20 degrees. Notable: 3rd instance this week of peculiar odor from direction of Whitmore residents. Unlike typical medical astringents, more industrial, reminiscent of preservation, chemicals used in university anatomical studies, not consistent with any known illness or treatment. Investigation attempted at 4:15 p.m. No response at door despite lights visible within. Cellar window observed sealed with unusual thoroughness, wooden shutters bolted, gaps packed with salt-like substance. Must consider formal inquiry. Through the night, neighbors reported strange sounds carrying through the frozen ground. Low moans that might have been wind in pipes, might have been something else. Mrs. Dennehy swore she heard singing, though no one else could confirm it. The Whitmore house stood silent, its windows reflecting nothing but swirling snow. By Sunday morning, the storm had settled into a steady fall. Dr. Roth walked through the drifts to the post office on Halsted Street, a carefully worded letter in his pocket. The clerk accepted his envelope, addressed to the Cook County Medical Board. Request for formal inspection. 721 Ashland Avenue. Attention. Chief Medical Inspector concerns regarding possible disease conditions and improper chemical storage. Strong astringent odors suggest unsafe practices. Recommend immediate investigation for public safety. The letter joined dozens of others delayed by the winter weather, buried in canvas bags waiting for clear roads to Springfield. By the time Postal Service resumed in the new year, the situation at 721 Ashland would be far beyond the reach of medical inspectors. The first day of 1889 dawned clear and brittle over Chicago's near west side. Fresh snow blanketed Ashland Avenue, transforming the industrial grime into pristine white. Children's laughter echoed as they dragged wooden sleds up and down the gentle slope, their woolen scarves trailing behind them. But at 721, the Whitmore house stood like a dark tooth in winter's smile. No smoke curled from its brick chimney. No footprints marred the snow on its front steps. The curtains hung still and heavy behind frost-etched windows. Deputy Sheriff Clark Moffat guided his horse through the rutted street, his breath clouding in the morning air. 4 case files sat heavy in his saddlebag: Walter Lentz, Joseph Kellerman, Thomas Burke, the rail tie cutter, and William Hayes, the clerk. All had vanished after taking lodging with the Whitmore sisters. The deputy's knock echoed hollow through the empty house. After the requisite wait, he tested the door. It swung open with a creak, hinges stiff with cold. The entryway felt wrong, too still, too quiet, like stepping into a tomb. In the dining room, place settings for 3 remained on the table, a fine layer of dust dulling the china. Dried tea leaves stuck to the bottom of cups, the liquid long evaporated. A half-eaten biscuit sat on one plate, edges hard as stone. The kitchen hearth was cold, its ashes undisturbed. A cast-iron kettle perched on the grate, orange rust creeping up its sides. Moffat ran a gloved finger along the mantel, studying the pattern of dust. No recent disturbance. Moving to the parlor, His boots clicked against bare floorboards. The sisters' prized oriental rug had been rolled to one side, revealing several boards that didn't quite match their neighbors. Moffat knelt, probing the seams with his pocket knife. They shifted slightly, suggesting recent work. But without a warrant or evidence of a crime, no blood, no body, no witness, he couldn't justify tearing up a private home's floor. He'd learned that lesson early in his career. Procedure protected both the law and the lawman. At Prairie State Savings and Trust, the teller confirmed what Moffat already suspected. Both sisters had closed their accounts on December 19th, withdrawing $412 in cash. No forwarding address was provided. The teller remembered Eunice Whitmore's calm demeanor as she signed the withdrawal slip, her copperplate handwriting precise as always. Back at his office, Moffat's pen scratched across official paper. Suspicious Circumstance Report. Date, January 1st, 1889. Location, 721 Ashland Avenue. Whitmore Sisters, Eunice and Agatha. Property abandoned approx. December 19th, 1888. No signs of forced entry or struggle. Previous inquiries relate to four missing persons, all male lodgers, spanning Octdeck, 1888. No bodies recovered. No direct evidence of foul play. Recommend monitor location for reoccupation. File remains open, pending new evidence. He pinned the report to his desk, studying it one last time before sliding it into the drawer marked Abandoned Premises, Female Owners. Outside his window, the afternoon sun glinted off fresh snow, and children's voices still carried on the winter air. In the coming weeks, city notices would begin appearing on lamp posts: scheduled drainage inspection, Ashland Avenue sewers, spring thaw. The March wind cut through Arnold Schaefer's oil-stained coat as he descended the iron rungs of the storm grate behind 721 Ashland Avenue. His lantern swung wildly, casting dancing shadows across the brick walls. Each breath brought the acrid stench of backed-up sewage stronger, making him cough into his sleeve. "Damn frost," he muttered, boots slipping on the icy metal. The winter's alternating thaw and freeze had cracked pipes across the city, but this leak had drawn particular attention. Mrs. Dennehy, 2 doors down, had complained of foul water seeping into her yard, darker than usual waste. At the bottom of the shaft, Schaefer steadied himself against the curved tunnel wall. His lantern illuminated a steady trickle of black water emerging from a fractured section of pipe. Something pale caught the light, a bundle wedged against the outflow grate, wrapped in waxed cloth and bound with twine. Schaefer had cleared countless blockages in his 16 years as inspector, mostly routine: dead rats, sodden newspapers, lost toys. But something about this package made his hands shake as he reached for it. The cloth was too carefully wrapped, the knots too precisely tied. The bundle came free with a wet sound. It was heavier than it looked, dense with something solid. As Schaefer turned it over, a corner of the wrapping fell away. He dropped his lantern. The light rolled, settling to illuminate what protruded from the cloth. Fingers, waxy white and partially preserved, still attached to a severed hand. Beside it, a piece of boot leather bore a maker's mark: L. Wendell and Sons, Cincinnati Fine Footwear. Schaefer scrambled up the ladder, his chest burning. 20 minutes later, 3 police wagons arrived at the Whitmore house. By sunrise Sunday, the narrow yard behind 721 Ashland filled with uniformed men. Deputy Sheriff Clark Moffat supervised as officers cleared the basement's coal pile, revealing the rear wall. "Here," Moffat called, his palm pressed against a soot-marked brick. The stone shifted under pressure, triggering a mechanism. A section of wall swung inward with a grinding sound, exposing a heavy trapdoor set into the floor. The stench that rose from the opened cellar made hardened officers gag. lime dust mixed with the metallic reek of old blood and the sharp tang of rust. 4 bodies lay arranged on crude wooden tables, partially covered by wax cloth. 2 had been systematically dissected, organs removed with surgical precision. Glass jars lined rough-hewn shelves along the walls, each labelled in a neat hand, S1, S2, F1, F2. Their contents floated in cloudy liquid. "Sir," called Officer Hayes, holding up something small and glinting. "Found this in the first subject's jaw." Moffat examined the gold molar in his palm. The dental work matched the description from Walter Lentz's brother, the Cincinnati hatter who'd vanished in October. By noon, the cellar had been photographed and sealed. 2 officers stood guard at the front door, while others strung rope across the yard to hold back gathering onlookers. Inside, the county coroner squinted at strange markings carved into the cellar's support beams. "These aren't random scratches," he said, tracing the precise lines with his finger. "They're surgical notes. But this is beyond my knowledge. We'll need help from the medical schools to decipher them." The autumn rain drummed against the windows of the Red Horse Inn as Dr. Solomon Ambrose settled into a worn leathered chair by the hearth. Outside, muddy wagons creaked past on the Decatur Road, their wheels cutting fresh ruts in the softening earth. The doctor had just finished his rounds, treating 3 cases of fever at the Miller farm, when the travelling bookseller's cart caught his eye. The seller, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, had spread his wares across 2 tables in the inn's common room. Most were penny dreadfuls and agricultural almanacs, but among them lay several medical texts, their leather bindings cracked but serviceable. "These came from a physician's estate in Springfield," the seller explained, lifting a heavy volume titled Gray's Anatomy of the Human Body. $2 for this one, barely used. Ambrose opened the book carefully, noting its clean pages and tight binding. But as he turned to the fly-leaf, something made him pause. There, pressed into the paper in neat script, were the initials EAW. Below them, in the same precise hand, ran columns of technical notes. "Thoracic access via 4th intercostal space yields optimal visualization. Male subjects, 2035 preferred for muscle definition. Preservation requires immediate arterial drainage. CPP 340, 342. Right nervous system isolation." The doctor's hands grew cold despite the nearby fire. He'd read about the Whitmore case in the Medical Society bulletin. The cellar, the bodies, the surgical precision that had shocked even hardened coroners. The handwriting held a familiar academic quality, like that of a school teacher. "I'll take it," Ambrose said quickly, counting out the coins. That night, in his study, he examined the notes more closely. The anatomical terms were used correctly, but there was something clinical, almost eager, in the marginal observations. He thought of the preserved specimens found in those cellar jars, each carefully labelled. By morning, the book was wrapped and addressed to the Cook County Coroner's Office, accompanied by a letter detailing its purchase. Ambrose added his medical society credentials and a suggestion to compare the writing with any known samples from Eunice Whitmore. The response came 2 weeks later, carried by special courier. The coroner had located Eunice's teacher certification from 1874, still filed with the Peoria County School Board. The handwriting matched perfectly. The same sharp angles, the same precise spacing, even the distinctive way she formed her capital letters. Deputy Sheriff Clark Moffat wasted no time. Within days, his office issued circular notices to every county seat in Illinois. Wanted for questioning. 2 unmarried women, aged 35-45, last seen wearing mourning attire, maybe using assumed names, approach with caution, report sightings to Cook County Sheriff's Office. The notice had barely begun circulating when a letter arrived from Champaign. A bookseller named Morris, recently arrested for selling counterfeit texts, claimed he remembered the Whitmore sisters. He'd sold them a complete set of surgical instruments, nearly new, near Vandalia that past March. The women had paid in cash, asking detailed questions about the quality of the steel. The ice-crusted waters of the Kaskaskia River burst their banks on Monday, February 17th, 1890, sending a torrent across the lowlands near Vandalia. As the flood receded that afternoon, 3 boys playing soldier discovered something peculiar in the exposed ruins of Whitaker's mill, abandoned since before the war. Tommy Porter, aged 12, spotted it first, a leather-bound book nailed to a wooden beam inside the crumbling foundation. The flood had washed away years of soil, revealing stone walls and a crude doorframe. "Look what the water showed," he called to his friends, pointing at pages, fluttering in the winter wind. Within an hour, Vandalia's Sheriff Burns stood in the muddy chamber, holding his lantern high. The space measured roughly 15 by 20 feet, with 4 iron frame cots bolted to the floor. Dark stains marked the mattresses. Along one wall, rusted surgical tools lay scattered, forceps, retractors, and items the sheriff couldn't name. Leather straps with brass buckles hung from each bedpost. The ledger, when carefully removed, proved to be a detailed record spanning months. Each entry listed weights, measurements, and clinical observations. December 24th, 1889. Subject F3, male, 186 lbs vocal cords intact post-procedure. Spinal access achieved between T4-T5. Pulse dropped at 4:15 p.m. Specimen preserved in solution, B. Sheriff Burns wired Chicago immediately. Found surgical chamber. Stop matches. Whitmore. Case. Stop require. Immediate assistance. Stop evidence preserved. Stop Deputy Sheriff Clark Moffat arrived the next morning by early train, his boots still muddy from Chicago's streets. He recognized the handwriting instantly, the same precise script from the anatomy book found in Decatur. But these entries were signed differently. A.W. The chamber told its own story. Glass jars lined crude shelves, their contents mostly dissolved by floodwater. A wooden table bore deep scratches, as if from desperate fingernails. Behind one cot, they found a woman's black glove, fine quality, missing 2 fingers. "When was this mill abandoned?" Moffat asked, examining rust patterns on the surgical tools. "Since '63 at least," Burns replied. "Union troops used it briefly during the war. Been empty since." The final ledger entry chilled them both. February 12th, 1890. Subject M2 responds well to spinal separation. Retain for further testing. Vocal responses documented separately. A.W. Only 5 days old. While cataloguing the evidence, a local deputy mentioned something curious. A Quaker woman had recently begun treating fevers in the nearby settlement of Butler's Grove. She called herself Sister Agnes and wore plain dark clothes. Several families praised her knowledge of anatomy and healing. "She came through just after New Year's," the deputy said. "Keeps to herself mostly. Stays in the meeting house." Moffat held up the black glove, studying its missing fingers. "This Sister Agnes," he asked carefully, "does she have any peculiarities about her hands?" The deputy nodded slowly. "Come to think of it, she always wears gloves, even while treating patients. Says it's for cleanliness." Moffat folded the ledger into his coat. After nearly a year of searching, Agatha Whitmore's careful script had finally betrayed her location. But where was Eunice? And what secrets lay in those documented separately vocal responses? The Quaker meeting house stood pale against the winter sky on Thursday morning, February 20th, 1890. Deputy Sheriff Moffat and 4 Vandalia lawmen approached the whitewashed building just as the first prayer bell tolled. Inside, Sister Agnes knelt beside a feverish child, her black dress pooling around her worn boots. "Agatha Whitmore," Moffat called from the doorway. "You're under arrest for the murders on Ashland Avenue." She didn't startle or run. Instead, she finished wrapping the child's wrist in linen before rising slowly. Her shorn hair, streaked with early grey, hung loose around her face. When the officers moved to seize her, she merely nodded and reached for her medical satchel. "That stays here," Moffat ordered. But as one deputy grabbed the bag, surgical tubing spilled onto the wooden floor, rubber hoses identical to those found in the Chicago cellar. The child's mother screamed. At the Vandalia jail, Agatha sat straight-backed in her chair, hands folded precisely in her lap. Her fingers, Moffat noticed, twitched whenever he mentioned Eunice's name. "My sister died of pneumonia near Effingham," she repeated, her voice flat. 3 months passed. I've been doing the Lord's work since then." "And the surgical implements?" Moffat pressed. "The ledger in the mill?" "A failed clinic for the poor," Agatha answered. "Nothing more." But her story crumbled quickly. The circuit judge in Sangamon County ordered depositions, starting with Dr. Solomon Ambrose. The physician described the anatomy book's detailed marginalia, notes that matched the mill ledger's precise terminology. Undertaker Caleb Jones testified next. He identified Agatha as the pale woman in black who had purchased 6 glass-preserving jars and surgical tubing in December. "She said it was for pickling," Jones recalled, but she knew the medical terms for arteries when she examined the embalming tools. The traveling bookseller, still held in Champaign on fraud charges, provided the most damning testimony. He described selling anatomy instruments to 2 stern women near the Kaskaskia River, one tall and commanding, the other deferential. They had discussed preservation techniques in detail. When confronted with these accounts, Agatha's composure finally fractured. "You don't understand," she whispered. "The work was necessary, scientific. We were going to publish our findings." Moffat ordered a subpoena of church records from Peoria. The documents revealed no marriage license, no death certificate for any husband. The sisters' claim of widowhood during the Great Peshtigo Fire was fiction. The final piece came from Miss Eleanor Webb, a retired school teacher who had taught both sisters at the Peoria Girls' Seminary. She compared samples of their writing from old class records to the mill ledger. "See here." Miss Webb pointed to the loops and slants. "Eunice's hand is more rigid, precise. Agatha's flows more, especially in her numbers. Both appear in these pages. They worked together." Agatha's face remained impassive as the evidence mounted, but her hands kept moving, marking invisible measurements in the air. When asked to provide a final affidavit, she wrote only, "A man in red." Gloves helped with the heavy work. He knew what we needed. The Cook County Courthouse groaned under the weight of spectators on May 12, 1890. Every wooden bench creaked with the press of bodies. Reporters from as far as New York, medical students eager to glimpse the infamous sister surgeon, and families of the missing who never received proper burial. Agatha Whitmore sat motionless in her black dress, now faded to grey after 3 months in custody. Her hands, once precise in their measurements, lay limp in her lap. Judge Harrison Blackwood adjusted his spectacles as he read the verdict. On 4 counts of willful murder and anatomical desecration, this court finds the defendant, Agatha Whitmore, guilty. His gavel crack echoed through the chamber. The sentence is life labor at the Joliet Prison for Women. She showed no reaction, but her shoulders straightened slightly when the judge declared her sister Eunice presumed deceased in absentia. Dr. Roth, watching from the gallery, noted in his diary that Agatha's lips moved in what appeared to be silent prayer, or perhaps counting. The bailiffs led her away. She left behind only a thin Bible, unmarked except for a pressed violet between pages recording the story of Cain and Abel. 7 years passed. Spring rains washed the last traces of 721 Ashland Avenue into Chicago's sewers. The case faded from headlines, replaced by newer horrors. Then, in the sweltering Kansas summer of 1897, a nurse named Sarah Paulson wrote in her patient log about a curious case in Topeka. A woman with a crushed larynx, unable to speak, arrived at the charity ward. Her fingers were stained with chemical burns, her grey hair cut short against her skull. Around her neck hung a gold locket, engraved simply, A.W. Paulson, who had read accounts of the Whitmore case in the Police Gazette, showed the woman newspaper clippings about the Chicago cellar. The patient's hands trembled as she traced the words. That night, she developed a fever that wouldn't break. In her delirium, the woman's fingers kept moving, marking precise measurements in the air, the same gestures Agatha had made during her trial. But before Paulson could telegraph Chicago authorities, the patient died. The only item in her possession was that locket, which vanished from the hospital's storage room before any official could examine it. Paulson wrote to the Cook County Sheriff's Office, detailing her observations. Her letter, addressed to Deputy Moffat, now retired, received no response. It remains filed in the Kansas State Medical Board archives, marked only Unsupported Claim Rare, Chicago Matter, 1890. The official Whitmore case file in Chicago ended with a clerk's notation: matter closed by conviction and presumed death of second party. But 8 pages from April 1890, depositions were conspicuously absent from the public record. In their place, a single note in Moffat's precise handwriting read, "Red gloves, unverified." When the house on Ashland Avenue finally fell to demolition crews in 1903, the cellar beams were sold for scrap. All but one disappeared into Chicago's endless reconstruction. That final beam, still bearing the carved initials E.W. in precise strokes, found its way into a private collection, a silent witness to whatever truth lay buried beneath those floorboards.